Yonapat, everybody. It's good to be with you today. It's Tim, and we're continuing our journey through the Bible, one day at a time. Today's reading was in 2 Samuel, chapter 23, 24. It's the last chapter of the book of 2 Samuel. The story of David is kind of coming to an end with the story of another of David's great sins. But this is not like his previous sin with Bathsheba. You read that, and we're all thinking, David, how could you? The problem with this one is you might read it and think, what sin? I don't get it. We read that God was angry with Israel, and so he was moved to tempt David to sin. It doesn't say why he was angry, but the problem was with the nation. But David was their representative, their king. Now, the Bible also says that Satan moved David to sin. We don't have to ask which it is. It's both. God moved him, Satan moved him. But, of course, James chapter 1 says God cannot be tempted with evil. He doesn't tempt any man. But he does allow Satan the boundaries that he has to abide by when it comes to tempting people. For example, Jesus was talking to Peter in the upper room. And he said, Peter, Satan has desired to sift you as wheat. He had to ask permission. Of course, in Peter's case, the answer was yes. He could use some sifting. I think that was the idea. So God allowed Satan that much latitude to tempt David. But he tempted him to number the people, which seems logical in a way. Maybe you wonder, why is that even a sin? We see how as David got older, he was losing some of his fighting ability. In fact, in one story that we read, he was almost killed until Abishai came and rescued him. And at that point, the army told David, any future battles, conduct those from headquarters. We need you to stay there so we don't lose our best man. And possibly that made David wonder, well, how much could he trust this army? But the result is he ordered a census to see what kind of an army he could raise, which is not unusual. Other kings have done the same thing. They want to know if I can rely on the army I've got if an enemy is attacking, or if I need to sue for peace because we can't possibly win. What is the problem with numbering people? Well, here's the problem. It's a lack of faith. Other armies may win based on the number of their soldiers and their equipment. This army, God's people, win because God is for them. God is the one who should decide when they go into battle and how. And the numbering the people just takes it out of God's hands. That's the problem. And when David realized that what he had done was wrong, he wanted to make it right. God gave him three choices through the prophet Gad: 3 years of famine, 3 months of running for his enemies, 3 days of plague. I appreciate what David said. Let me fall into the hands of God. But he also realized he needed to bring a sacrifice to atone for his sin. So God directed him to the threshing floor where the angel of death was there with his sword out. And that would be where he would bring the offering for his sin. He bought the threshing floor. He said, I'm not going to give offerings that cost me nothing. He paid for the wood. He paid for the animals. And God was atoned. That was the end of the plague. What's interesting, though, is that very site where the threshing floor was and where that makeshift altar that David constructed became the site of the temple that Solomon would build. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world would be built on that spot, and that's where people would come to worship. That's where they would come to confess their sins and to find atonement. That would be the place of God's mercy. It's interesting how this sin, judgment, led to mercy. But that's the kind of God we serve. He's just, yes, he is just, but he's also a merciful God. Now, we don't have to offer sacrifices today because the sacrifice of Christ on the cross was sufficient. It paid the price for sin for all time and for all sins. But God does require a different kind of sacrifice from us. We read in Romans chapter 12, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You know, we seldom think of living for God as a sacrifice. We think of it maybe as something extra. We're adding that in addition to a life that's already filled with other activities and other things and other plans. Our problem is we want living for God to be easy. We don't want it to be a sacrifice. When it gets hard, that's when people stop and think, whoa, that's not what I signed up for. No, sacrifice is not easy. David would not take the easy way, even when it was offered to him. Same is true with our lives. When we look at our lives and what we can give to God, our time or our money, our love, it costs. Jesus described it in Matthew 10:38. He said, he that taketh not up his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake. You take your life and your ambitions and your hopes and your talents and give them to God. That's when your life becomes a living sacrifice. Well, think about that today, will you? We'll get into 1 Kings tomorrow. We look at 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2, and I'd encourage you to read that, and I'm glad to join you then. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you soon.